The air tastes of cordite and brick dust. A fine gray powder coats everything, settling in your hair, under your nails, at the back of your throat. Bombs have a sound, but they also have a smell. It is the smell of a city being torn apart, molecule by molecule. This was the world for Anneliese Schmidt in the spring of 1945. Not her real name, but a name to hold the memories of thousands like her. She was a Flakhelferin, an anti-aircraft assistant. 19 years old. Her job was to track the silver glints of Allied bombers in the sky. The same bombers that turned her city, Dresden, into a funeral pyre. She expected retribution from these enemies. She expected cruelty. What she did not expect was kindness. If you believe small acts can change the world, subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you are watching from. The only food was thin soup made from weeds pulled from the rubble. The bread was so hard it felt like chewing on stone. Propaganda had been her other nourishment. For years, the radio told her Americans were gangsters and capitalists, a mongrel race that would show no mercy. Joseph Goebbels' voice promised that surrender meant torture, enslavement, a fate worse than death for German women. She believed it. Her world had been built on such certainties. Then, one day in April, the noise stopped. The fighting was over. The silence was more terrifying than the bombs. Her unit, a ragged collection of old men and teenage girls, surrendered to an American patrol. Anneliese stood in a line, trembling. She avoided the eyes of the American soldiers. They were so big. Well-fed. Their uniforms were not tattered rags, they chewed gum. She watched one of them offer a cigarette to her commanding officer. There was no shouting, no immediate brutality, just a weary, bureaucratic efficiency. This was the first crack in the wall of her fear. Anneliese and hundreds of other female prisoners were processed. Nurses, secretaries, communication staff. They were now prisoners of war, subject to the rules of the Geneva Convention, a document they knew nothing about. They were herded onto trucks, then trains. Finally, into the dark belly of a transport ship bound for the United States. For weeks, the only reality was the rhythmic groan of the ship's hull and the smell of salt and diesel. The propaganda films replayed in her mind. But then came the second crack, the food. It was a thick stew with actual meat in it. And bread. Soft, white bread. She had not seen bread like it in 5 years. She watched other women weep at the simple luxury of a full stomach. This act of feeding them was more disorienting than any cruelty. When they finally saw land, it was so green, so whole. The skyline of New York City was not a jagged row of bombed-out teeth. It was a monument to a country the war had never touched. On a train, the journey across America began. This was the true shock. Through the barred windows, Anneliese saw a nation she could not comprehend. Towns with painted houses and neat lawns. Children playing a strange game with a bat and ball. Bright signs advertising something called Coca-Cola. Factories with smoke billowing from their stacks, not from bombs, but from industry. This country was not starving. It was thriving. The paradox was staggering. Her homeland, which claimed superiority, was a ruin. This enemy nation, taught to be weak, was a paradise of impossible abundance. The doubt in her mind was no longer a crack. It was a chasm. Her destination was Camp Fordyce, Arkansas, one of over 500 prisoner of war camps in the United States. The first order was to strip and head to the showers. Anneliese braced for humiliation, for cold, harsh water. Instead, she was met with a miracle. Hot water. Steaming, endless, glorious hot water. And soap. A real bar of soap that lathered. For women caked in the grime of a fallen nation, this was a baptism. It washed away more than just dirt. It began to wash away the years of ideology. They were given clean barracks and 3 meals a day. The work in the cotton fields was hard, but the food was plentiful. They were the enemy. And yet, they were given hot showers and clean beds. Letters from her family, smuggled through the Red Cross, described starvation back in Germany. Her own people were suffering, while she, a prisoner, was eating better than she had in years. The honor of the fatherland versus the survival offered by the enemy. The cruelty of her own system versus the strange mercy of her captors. Nothing made sense anymore. She was a prisoner, but for the first time in years, she felt safe. and she did not understand why. The days at Camp Fordyce fell into a rhythm, sunup to sundown. The work in the cotton fields was relentless under the Arkansas sun. The humid air was thick, a world away from the cold, damp cellars of Dresden. But the labor was honest. It was simple, and it was always followed by food. So much food. The International Red Cross, in a 1944 report, confirmed that German prisoners in America received the same daily ration as American soldiers. Over 4,000 calories. Back home, Annalise's family was lucky to get 1,500. This was not just sustenance. It was a weapon of confusion. Then came the other invasions. Small, cultural shocks that dismantled her worldview piece by piece. There was a strange, sticky brown paste served on bread. Peanut butter. The women stared at it, unsure. Was it a punishment? A joke? They watched the guards eat it with relish. Annalise tried it. The taste was alien, salty and sweet. It was the taste of a nation that had time for such peculiar luxuries. They were given bottles of a dark, bubbling liquid. Coca-Cola, the name she had seen on signs from the train. It was cold, sweet, and fizzed on her tongue. It was nothing like the ersatz coffee and thin beer of a dying Reich. It was the taste of abundance. Sometimes, from the guards' radios, a strange music would drift over the camp, not the rousing marches or somber Wagner she knew. It was a chaotic, joyful sound, full of brass and rhythm. Jazz. It sounded like freedom, like a country so confident it could afford to be playful. They watched the guards play their strange game, baseball, in the evenings. The crack of the bat, the casual shouts. It was a ritual of peace performed in the heart of a prison camp. Each detail was a question. How could an enemy this powerful, this wealthy, this carefree, be the degenerate force she was taught to despise? America in 1944 did not just build ships and planes. It built over 963,000 refrigerators for its own homes. Her nation built tanks. This nation built kitchens. One afternoon, a guard handed Annalise a letter. It bore the stamp of the Red Cross. Her hands trembled as she opened it. It was from her mother. The words were cramped, the paper thin. Her mother wrote of the hunger, the endless, gnawing hunger in Berlin. She wrote of the cold, with no fuel for the stoves. She wrote of the fear of the occupying soldiers. Her younger brother was still missing, presumed dead on the Eastern Front. The last line was a plea. Send anything you can. Some bread. Some soap. She held the letter, the paper absorbing the sweat from her palms. She had eaten meat that day. She had washed with soap and hot water. She, the prisoner, was living a life of luxury compared to her family, the liberated. The cruelty of it was a physical blow. Her captors were keeping her alive while her saviors were letting her family starve. The world was not just cracked, it was upside down. If this staggering irony of war surprises you, subscribe to our channel, because the truth of what happened next is even more unexpected. The letter changed everything. The guilt was a constant poison. She saw the same conflict in the eyes of the other women. Some grew harder, their hatred for America calcifying into a shield. They would sing forbidden nationalist songs in whispers after dark, clinging to the phantom of a lost cause. But others, like Annalise, began to drift. They started asking the guards questions. Learning a few words of English, a quiet curiosity began to replace the rigid certainty of their old lives. What was this country that imprisoned its enemies in camps cleaner and safer than the homes of its own citizens? One evening, staring through the fence at the setting sun, the paradox became clear. Her body was captive, but her mind was slowly being set free. Free from the lies, free from the hunger, free from the constant terror of the bombs. Back home, her family had their freedom, but they were prisoners of starvation, of grief, of a devastated continent. Annalise looked at her hands, calloused from picking an enemy's cotton. She was a prisoner, thousands of miles from the rubble she called home, working for the very people who had destroyed it. She was a captive. But for the first time, she wondered what freedom was truly worth, if it meant starving in the ruins of a lie. The American captors called it re-education. For the women of Camp Fordyce, it was an autopsy, a slow, methodical dissection of a dead ideology. It began not with morality, but with mathematics. In a makeshift classroom, an American officer stood before them with a chalkboard. He did not speak of good and evil. He spoke of steel. He told them that in 1944, Germany produced just over 27,000 tanks. In that same year, the United States produced over 96,000. He let the number hang in the air. Then he moved on. Refrigerators. America had built nearly 1 million of them for its own homes while the war raged. Washing machines, automobiles for civilians. The numbers were a relentless assault. Annalise and the others had been told they were a superior nation, an industrial titan destined to rule. But the numbers on the chalkboard told a different story. They had not been a titan. They had been a small, furious country that had picked a fight with a sleeping giant. The lie of their strength was the first body on the table. Then came the films. The prisoners were herded into a recreation hall. A projector flickered to life. There were no Hollywood actors. No dramatic music. Just grainy, silent footage. Piles of shoes. Mountains of eyeglasses. Emaciated bodies being pushed into pits by bulldozers. The names were spoken by the officer. Buchenwald, Dachau, Bergen-Belsen. This was not propaganda. Propaganda was loud, colorful, full of promises. This was a quiet, gray, methodical truth. The women watched in stunned silence. Some vomited. Others sobbed, a low, animal sound of pure grief. Annalise felt a coldness spread through her chest, a void where her patriotism used to be. She remembered the neighbors who had disappeared in the night, the whispers, the fear. It all clicked into place with sickening clarity. They had not been fighting for honor, for the fatherland. They had been the guards of a slaughterhouse. This was the second body on the table, the lie of their goodness. The camp became a place of ghosts. The rhythms of work and food continued, but the spirit was broken. The women who had once sung nationalist songs now sat in silence, their eyes hollow. 2 women tried to hang themselves with their bedsheets. They were cut down by the guards, their despair now a matter of official record. The honor they had been taught to die for was a fiction. But what was the alternative? To live with the shame, to accept the mercy of an enemy who now seemed more civilized than their own people. Annalise saw the choice starkly. You could let the truth kill you, or you could find a way to carry its impossible weight. She chose to carry it. She started watching the guards more closely. She listened to their casual conversations, trying to piece together the sounds of their language. She began to see them not as captors, but as men. Young men, like her brother, who laughed and worried and missed their homes. The daily march to the cotton fields became a different kind of ritual. Before, it was a march of defiance. Now it was a walk of shame. They passed the same small houses, the same neat lawns. But Annalise no longer saw a decadent, weak enemy. She saw a world of impossible peace. A world that built homes instead of bunkers. One sweltering afternoon, she saw a group of children playing by the side of the road. They stopped their game to watch the line of prisoners pass. They did not shout insults. They did not throw stones. They just watched, their faces open with a simple, uncomplicated curiosity. Annalise looked at them, at their clean clothes and well-fed faces, and she felt a pang of something that was not hatred, not envy, but a profound and sorrowful question. After everything she now knew, who was truly the prisoner, and who was truly free? The news of the war's end did not arrive with a cheer. It landed with a thud. A quiet announcement from the camp commandant. Germany had surrendered unconditionally. They were no longer prisoners of war. They were now citizens of a dead country. There was no celebration, only a vast, hollow silence filled with unspoken questions. What would they return to? Who was still alive? And how could they go back to a world they no longer understood? The journey home was the reverse of a nightmare. They were leaving the safe, orderly world of their prison for the chaos of their freedom. The ship sailed east, toward a sunrise over a continent of ghosts. Annalise stood on the deck, watching America shrink on the horizon. She clutched a small, worn German-English dictionary, a gift from one of the guards. She had learned the words for bread, water, thank you. She had also learned the words for industry, democracy, and concentration camp. The America she was leaving was no longer an enemy. It was a complex, overwhelming truth. A place of peanut butter and bulldozers. A nation that could produce enough food to feed its enemies, and enough bombs to erase them. She felt no loyalty to the flag that was disappearing behind her. She felt no loyalty to the ruined one she was sailing toward. She was adrift, a citizen of the chasm between two worlds. The first sight of Germany was the port of Hamburg. It was not a city, it was a geological feature carved by fire and steel, skeletons of buildings clawed at a gray sky. The people moved like shadows through the ruins, their faces thin and smudged with a permanent layer of dust. This was the reality the numbers on the chalkboard had promised. This was the cost of their leaders. Lies. Anneliese found her mother in a crowded refugee center in Berlin. The woman who greeted her was a stranger, aged 20 years and 20 months. They embraced, but it was an embrace across a void. Her mother asked if the Americans had been cruel. Anneliese looked at her own hands, still soft from the camp's decent food, and simply said, "No." How could she explain? How could she describe the hot showers to a woman who had not been warm in a year? How could she talk about the plentiful food to a family that survived on boiled nettles? The truth was a luxury they could not afford. It was a food she could not share. So she was silent. She worked, helping to clear rubble, her mind a silent movie of another world. A world of green lawns and carefree children playing baseball. The greatest shock of the war was not the defeat. It was not the destruction. It was the quiet, methodical, baffling mercy of the enemy. It was a weapon she had no defense against. It had not broken her body. It had captured her mind. Anneliese had lost the war, but she had been conquered by something far more profound than battle. She had been conquered by kindness. She was free in a nation of ruins. But a part of her would forever be a prisoner in a quiet camp in Arkansas, wondering how a country could be powerful enough to destroy your world and gentle enough to show you how to build a new one. If this story about the unexpected consequences of war moved you, like this video and subscribe to our channel for more hidden histories. Let us know in the comments what detail of her experience shocked you the most.